Captain Jack Reynolds stared out the viewport of the Earth diplomatic vessel grudging apology and wondered, for approximately the 10,000th time, why humanity had ever bothered making contact with the rest of the galaxy. The stars twinkled back at him, offering no answers, just the cold shoulder of cosmic indifference, much like the aliens he was about to meet. Again. Captain, your blood pressure is elevating, announced VERA, the ship's AI assistant. Would you like me to prepare your usual pre-diplomatic encounter cocktail? 1 part whiskey, 2 parts regret, with a splash of what did I do to deserve this? Just the whiskey, VERA. Reynolds sighed, running a hand through his prematurely graying hair. I need to keep the regret tank full for the conference. Very good, sir. Also, Ambassador Clawn Tith of the Galactic Confederation has sent another memo regarding appropriate speaking volumes for tomorrow's session. Apparently, our previous assurances were insufficient. Reynolds snorted. Of course they were. God forbid a human speaks at a volume audible beyond 3 feet without filing the proper paperwork. The grudging apology wasn't just the name of his ship, it was humanity's unofficial motto since joining the Galactic Confederation. Earth, as it turned out, it was classified as a death world, a planet so ridiculously dangerous that evolving there had made humans the equivalent of indestructible space orcs in the eyes of the galactic community. Everything about humans terrified the other species. Our endurance? Horrifying. Our ability to consume nearly any organic matter? Disgusting. Our habit of continuing to fight after sustaining injuries that would kill most sentient beings? Barbaric. Even our laughter was catalogued as aggressive sonic assault in the Galactic Encyclopedia. Sir, we're docking at Neutral Station Alpha in 15 minutes. The diplomatic team is assembled in the briefing room, VERA announced. Reynolds nodded and downed his whiskey in 1 gulp. Time to go apologize for existing again. The briefing room contained the 5 other members of Earth's delegation. Lieutenant Marina Okafor, the xenobiologist with a poker face that had once convinced a Phobian truth-seer that humans photosynthesize. Dr. Theo Alvarez, legal expert and master of finding loopholes in 27 different alien legal systems. Commander Dakota Pierce, security chief, whose physical strength had accidentally caused 3 diplomatic incidents already. And the twins, Finn and Fiona Maxwell, communications specialists who finished each other's sentences in a way that deeply unsettled most alien species. All right, team. Reynolds addressed the room. Today's mission is simple. Try not to breathe too loudly, apologize profusely when you inevitably do, and maybe, just maybe, we'll retain mining rights to at least 1 asteroid in the Proxima Centauri belt. So, Tuesday, Okafor deadpanned. What's on the apology agenda today, Captain? Asked Finn. Let me guess, continued Fiona. Someone remembered that humans occasionally blink both eyes simultaneously, and now we need to surrender another star system. Reynolds pulled up the conference schedule on the holo display. Very close. The Phobian Collective has filed a formal complaint about the sound human teeth make when we chew. They're demanding exclusive rights to the helium reserves on Neptune as compensation for their collective trauma. The team groaned in unison. And that's just the morning session, Reynolds concluded. After lunch, which we'll have to consume in private because apparently watching humans eat is an act of psychological warfare, we're scheduled for a 6-hour apology ceremony to the Zorn Empire for the time Commander Pierce accidentally sneezed in their general direction. As the grudging apology docked at Neutral Station Alpha, Reynolds couldn't help but wonder how much more of this humanity could take. The aliens had no idea what they were poking. Earth's status as a death world didn't just make humans physically resilient, it had forged a collective psychological resilience that was reaching its breaking point. And if there was one thing the galaxy should fear more than humans being strong, it was humans getting fed up. Neutral Station Alpha hung in space, like a giant metal snowflake, all delicate-looking spires and impossible geometry, designed to accommodate the various environmental and gravitational needs of a dozen major species. It was beautiful, Reynolds had to admit, even as he knew that humans had been allocated the station's maintenance shafts as their appropriate accommodations. The theory, as patiently explained by the Veltraxian station administrator, was that humans would feel most comfortable in cramped, dangerous spaces that reminded them of their predatory cave-dwelling ancestry. The reality was that nobody wanted to room next to the scary Deathworlders, who might accidentally kill them by snoring too loudly. Captain Reynolds, how fortunate to encounter you before the formal proceedings. A tall, willowy figure with iridescent blue skin and far too many fingers glided toward him. Ambassador Clawn Tith of the Veltraxian Confederacy, the galaxy's most proficient bureaucrats, and the self-appointed rule-makers of interstellar diplomacy. Ambassador, Reynolds nodded, carefully calibrating his voice to what the Veltraxian sensitivity charts designated as minimally alarming. I trust you've received our 73 amendments to today's agenda. Clawn Tith's head tilted at an angle that humans found deeply unsettling. The Phobians have requested 17 additional microaggressions be added to the formal apology registry. 17? They're getting efficient. Indeed. Most efficient. And the Zorn delegates insist that all humans present must wear these. Clawn Tith produced what looked like metallic nose plugs. They've developed new sensitivities to human respiration. Reynolds accepted the nose plugs with what he hoped passed for a diplomatic smile rather than a grimace. The Zorn Empire, a species of gelatinous, multi-eyed blobs, had been particularly aggressive in their demands for human concessions. Despite having the galaxy's largest military fleet, they claimed that human unpredictability caused them existential anxiety that could only be soothed with resource treaties heavily tilted in their favor. Captain, VERA's voice came through his earpiece. The Phobian representative is approaching from your left. Emotional distress indicators are already active. Reynolds turned to see the approaching Phobian, a creature resembling a walking sea anemone encased in a protective bubble. The Phobian collective was famous for two things: their incredible empathic abilities and their complete inability to handle any emotion stronger than mild contentment. They were the galaxy's professional victims, and they'd elevated taking offense to an art form. Captain Reynolds, the Phobian's translator, warbled, its tendrils already changing from pink to a distressed orange. Your posture contains microaggressions. Please assume a more submissive stance, or we shall be forced to withdraw from negotiations. Reynolds hunched his shoulders and lowered his gaze. A pose he'd practiced for hours that communicated harmless in Phobian body language and having severe back problems in human terms. Better, the Phobian acknowledged. We have prepared a 40-minute presentation on how human teeth represent an evolutionary threat display that constitutes a form of unconscious violence. I look forward to it, Reynolds lied. The situation in the Proxima Centauri system had brought matters to a head. 3 months ago, astronomical surveys had discovered a cluster of asteroids rich in rare earth elements, and, more importantly, with the elusive element X that made faster-than-light travel possible. By all rights and galactic laws, Earth had the strongest claim to these resources. Proxima Centauri was humanity's backyard, after all. But the Galactic Confederation had a different view. According to Ambassador Clawn Tith, humanity's aggressive expansion, building 3 small research outposts, constituted territorial intimidation of nearby species. The Zorn Empire had claimed that human mining techniques were unacceptably violent toward inanimate matter and demanded a 90% share of all resources as emotional compensation. Reynolds entered the main conference chamber, a vast amphitheater designed to keep different species at what they considered safe distances from each other. Humans, naturally, were isolated in a small box at the far end, behind 3 different types of containment fields that Reynolds strongly suspected weren't actually necessary. Let the 47th emergency session of the Proxima Centauri Resource Allocation Committee come to order, announced Clawn Tith. First item, formal apologies from the human delegation for 17 newly identified microaggressions. Captain Reynolds, you may approach the contrition podium. As Reynolds walked to the center of the chamber, he caught sight of the Zorn delegation, 5 glistening purple blobs in hovering environmental suits. Their spokesblob, General Morks, fixed all 7 of its eyes on Reynolds with what could only be described as smug anticipation. Something in Reynolds' last remaining reserves of diplomatic patience began to crack. Before the distinguished representative from Earth begins the apology ceremony, General Morks's amplified voice echoed through the chamber. The Zorn Empire would like to submit an additional grievance. Reynolds paused at the contrition podium, a ridiculous structure designed to physically lower the speaker as they delivered their apology. He'd already assumed the standard human remorse posture, shoulders hunched, head bowed, hands clasped in front of him like a scolded child. The floor recognizes General Morks of the Zorn Empire. Claunt Tith acknowledged with a respectful bow. The Zorn general's gelatinous form rippled with what Reynolds had come to recognize as their version of self-satisfaction. It has come to our attention that Captain Reynolds consumed a fermented beverage before this session. This constitutes biological warfare, as human alcohol consumption produces exhaled compounds that trigger existential dread in Zorn physiology. There was a collective gasp from the assembled delegates. The Phobian's protective bubbles darkened in distress. The Zorn Empire demands immediate reparations in the form of transferring all mining rights in the Proxima Centauri system to our control. Morks continued. And the human must, of course, apologize. Reynolds blinked. I had a single whiskey in my private quarters 3 hours ago. The human admits to the offense, declared a Veltraxian adjudicator, tentacles fluttering in agitation. The record shall show conscious biological aggression. Captain, VERA's voice warned in his earpiece, your heart rate is elevating beyond diplomatic parameters. Reynolds felt something snap inside him, a small, critical filament of patience that had been stretched thin for too long. Ambassador Claunt Tith, he said, careful to keep his voice level, I'd like to inquire about the atmospheric sensors in this chamber. The Veltraxian blinked 3 sets of eyelids in confusion. They are the most sophisticated in the galaxy. Why do you ask? Because Reynolds continued, stepping away from the contrition podium, causing another collective gasp. I'd like verification that my breath contains these alleged compounds. It seems unlikely given human metabolic rates that. The human questions establish science, cried a Phobian representative, its tendrils now crimson with alarm. General Morks's blob body pulsed smugly. Are you suggesting the Zorn Empire would fabricate such a claim? This is another microaggression. Reynolds smiled. Not his diplomatic smile, but his real one, the one that showed teeth. Several delegates visibly recoiled. VERA, he said aloud, please access the station's atmospheric analysis logs for the past hour. There was an uncomfortable silence as VERA interfaced with the station's systems. The AI's voice then projected through the chamber speakers. Analysis complete. No traces of human metabolized alcohol compounds present in the chamber atmosphere. Further, I have accessed the Galactic Medical Database, which contains no record of Zorn sensitivity to human exhaled ethanol derivatives. The chamber erupted in confused chittering and gelatinous wobbling. This is unnecessary procedural aggression, Morks's translator screeched. We demand an immediate apology for this fact-checking. Reynolds stepped fully away from the contrition podium and stood at his full height, an act that violated at least 7 diplomatic protocols. No, he said simply. The single word seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Several Phobians fainted, their bubbles implementing emergency cushioning protocols. What did the human say? Ambassador Claunt Tith's translator struggled to process the response. I said no. Reynolds straightened his uniform. No more apologies. Not for breathing, not for having teeth, not for evolving on a planet that made us strong, and certainly not for calling out a blatant lie. Captain. Lieutenant Okafor's voice came urgently through his comm. What are you doing? Something that should have been done a long time ago, he replied without taking his eyes off the aliens. The human has gone feral. Shrieked a Veltraxian observer. Implement containment protocols. Actually, came VERA's cool voice through the station speakers, I've taken the liberty of locking down those systems. They seem to be malfunctioning today. How unfortunate. Style. Reynolds smiled at the nearest camera, silently thanking his AI companion for having his back. General Morks. He addressed the now quivering purple blob directly. The Zorn Empire has just been caught attempting to manipulate these proceedings with a demonstrable falsehood. Under Article 37C of the Galactic Confederation Charter, This constitutes diplomatic fraud and nullifies all pending resource claims. You can't. Morks began. I can and I am. Reynolds turned to address the entire chamber. Humanity has tolerated being treated as monsters for 50 years. We've apologized for our strength, our resilience, our very biology. We've given up resources, territories, and our dignity. And today it stops. Throughout the chamber, delegates were frantically communicating with their homeworlds. The quiet dignity in Reynolds' voice seemed more terrifying to them than any human shout could have been. If anyone needs me, Reynolds concluded as he walked toward the exit, I'll be in the human delegation's quarters, you know. Those lovely maintenance shafts you stuck us in preparing our new terms for continued participation in this confederation. As the doors closed behind him, Reynolds heard the unmistakable sound of panic breaking out among the assembled diplomats. It was, he had to admit, music to his ears. You've started an interstellar incident, Lieutenant Okafor stated flatly as she entered the cramped maintenance shaft that served as their delegation's common room. It wasn't an accusation, merely an observation. Technically, Reynolds replied, pouring himself another whiskey. I ended one. 50 years of incidents. To be precise. The entire human delegation had assembled in their quarters, a junction of maintenance tunnels hastily converted with the addition of some cots and a food synthesizer that only produced bland nutritional paste. The Galactic Confederation had insisted this was for everyone's safety, not a slight against humanity. The station's in chaos, Commander Pierce reported, ducking to avoid a low-hanging pipe. The Phobians have quarantined themselves in their quarters, claiming emotional trauma. The Veltraxians are citing 17 different diplomatic protocols that we violated. And the Zorn. He grinned. The Zorn are absolutely silent. Because they got caught, Finn said. Red-handed. Fiona added. Or red-blobbed. Dr. Alvarez, who had been rapidly scrolling through legal texts on his tablet, looked up with a rare smile. Captain, what you did out there was either the bravest or stupidest diplomatic move in human history, but it was completely legal. The Zorn violated the Charter, not us. The various ambassadors have sent 37 urgent messages in the last 20 minutes, VERA announced. Would you like me to categorize them by level of hysteria? No need, Reynolds said. I think we should address them all at once. VERA, request an emergency session of the full Confederation Council. 1 hour from now. Sir? Okafor looked concerned. What exactly are you planning? Reynolds took a moment to look at each member of his team. For 50 years, humanity has been apologizing for crimes we never committed. We've been giving up resources, territories, rights because we made the galaxy uncomfortable by simply existing. And where has it gotten us? Stuck in maintenance shafts while the Zorn try to steal the resources in our own backyard. He pulled up a holographic display showing a history of Earth's diplomatic concessions. It was a staggering list. Mining rights in the asteroid belt surrendered because human mining techniques were too aggressive. Restrictions on human colony expansion because our reproductive rates caused demographic anxiety among longer-lived species. Earth manufacturing limited because our factories were unnecessarily efficient. Remember when we had to give up coffee exports? Reynolds pointed to a particularly absurd incident. Because the Veltraxians claimed the smell constituted olfactory assault. And then we caught them selling it on the black market at 1,000% markup, Pierce growled. Or the time we had to pay reparations to the Phobian collective, Finn began. Because our Olympic Games glorified dangerous physical competition, Fiona finished. Or my personal favorite, Alvarez added, when the Zorn Empire claimed human music was weaponized sound frequencies and demanded we surrender our entire cultural archive only for us to discover they were selling tickets to human horror music experiences throughout their empire. Reynolds nodded grimly. We've been played. For 50 years we've been the galaxy's punching bag because we're different. Because we evolved on a world that made us stronger, more durable, more adaptable. And they've manipulated our desire for peaceful coexistence into a tool to take advantage of us. What's your plan, Captain? Pierce asked, a dangerous gleam in his eye. I think it's time to show the galaxy what Deathworlders are really capable of, Reynolds replied. Not through violence, we're better than that, but through something they might find even more terrifying. Which is? Okafor prompted. Reynolds smiled. Standing up for ourselves. An hour later, the human delegation walked into the Confederation Council chamber not hunched in apologetic postures, but standing tall. Reynolds had instructed them to move naturally, speak at their normal volumes, and stop pretending to be less than what they were. The effect on the assembled alien representatives was immediate and dramatic. Several Phobians retreated behind additional force fields. The Veltraxian contingent froze in what their species considered a defensive posture. The Zorn representatives' environmental suits seemed to vibrate with tension. This emergency session is called to order, announced the Confederation mediator, a theoretically neutral AI constructed by the founding species. Captain Reynolds of Earth has requested the floor. Reynolds stepped up to the speaker's podium, notably, not the contrition podium that humans were usually directed to. Representatives of the Galactic Confederation, he began, his voice clear and unapologetic. For 50 years, humanity has played by your rules. We've humbled ourselves, restricted ourselves, and apologized for our very nature in the name of peaceful coexistence. He paused, making eye contact with delegates around the chamber. Today that ends. Not with threats, not with violence, but with truth. Humanity will no longer apologize for evolving on a high-gravity world with atmospheric oxygen levels you find alarming. We will no longer concede our resources because our natural abilities make you uncomfortable. We will no longer pretend to be less than what we are. A murmur ran through the chamber, not quite panic, but getting there. The Zorn Empire has been caught in a deliberate diplomatic fraud, Reynolds continued. But they are merely the most blatant example of what has been happening to us for decades. So here are humanity's new terms for continued participation in this confederation. This is unprecedented. Ambassador Clauntith's translator struggled to keep up with his agitated tentacle gestures. The humans cannot simply state facts. Reynolds suggested helpfully. Exercise our rights under the Charter? Refuse to be bullied. The chamber had descended into barely controlled chaos. The human delegation's new terms were being projected on the main display. 1. Full mining rights to the Proxima Centauri asteroid field, as is Earth's right as the nearest established civilization. 2. Immediate reclassification of humans from dangerous sentience to standard sentience in all Confederation documentation. 3. An end to all species-specific restrictions on human movement, manufacturing, and cultural expression. 4. Equal accommodations for human delegates at all Confederation facilities. 5. A formal investigation into systematic discrimination against Earth in previous diplomatic negotiations. What the humans fail to understand, General Morks's blob body pulsed angrily, is that these accommodations exist for the safety of all species. Their inability to see how threatening they are only proves our point. Interesting perspective, General, Reynolds replied. VERA, could you please display the financial records we uncovered? The main screen shifted to show complex economic data streams. VERA's voice explained. Analysis of Confederation trade records indicates that the Zorn Empire has increased its economic output by 327% in the 50 years since Earth and EU joined the Confederation. Approximately 62% of this growth can be directly attributed to resources and territories ceded by Earth under diplomatic pressure. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. You've been playing us, Reynolds continued, all of you. Using our willingness to compromise as a weapon against us, making us feel like monsters for merely existing, while quietly taking everything you could. This is Deathworlder aggression. A Phobian representative wailed from behind 3 layers of protective bubbling. They're using data as a weapon. Actually, Dr. Alvarez stepped forward. Under Article 42 of the Confederation Charter, any species has the right to request a full economic audit when evidence of systematic exploitation is presented. We're simply exercising that right. The Veltraxians huddled together in frantic discussion. As the Confederation's bureaucratic experts, they knew better than anyone how many regulations had been bent or broken in the systematic exploitation of humanity. Ambassador Claude Tith finally stepped forward. Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding in our cultural exchange. The Veltraxian Confederacy would be open to reviewing certain policies. All policies, Reynolds corrected firmly, and not just reviewed. Changed. The Zorn Empire will never submit to Deathworlder demands. General Morks declared, his environmental suit hovering higher as if to physically demonstrate superiority. Reynolds smiled. Commander Pierce, would you mind demonstrating what humans are actually capable of when we're not restraining ourselves? Pierce grinned and walked to the center of the chamber. From his pocket, he removed a small metal bar standard Confederation steel alloy used throughout the station. With no apparent effort, he bent the bar into a pretzel shape. The chamber went dead silent. A fun fact about humans, Pierce announced cheerfully. We've been operating at about 20% of our physical capability in Confederation spaces to avoid scaring anyone. That's why I seemed so clumsy I've been deliberately weakening myself. Several delegates began edging toward the exits. Oh, and there's more, Reynolds added. Finn, Fiona, care to demonstrate some human cognitive abilities we've been downplaying? The twins stepped forward with matching grins. The Galactic Confederation Charter contains exactly 12,394 articles, sub-articles, and clauses, Finn began. We've memorized all of them, Fiona continued. Would anyone like us to recite the entire thing, backwards? While doing complex mathematical calculations, that won't be necessary. Ambassador Claude Tith intervened hastily. Your point is adequately made. Reynolds turned to address the entire chamber. Let me be crystal clear. This is not a threat. Humans have no desire for conflict. We've been peaceful members of this confederation for 50 years, despite how we've been treated. All we're asking for is equal treatment and an end to the exploitation. But a Veltraxian delegate ventured, your physical capabilities make other species uncomfortable. Surely you understand? I understand being careful around those with different physical abilities, Reynolds acknowledged. What I don't understand is using that difference to systematically rob us of our rights and resources. He pointed directly at General Morks. The Zorn have the largest military fleet in the Confederation, capable of destroying entire planets. Yet somehow, humans are considered the dangerous ones because we can lift heavy objects and survive falls. The logic was undeniable, and a subtle shift began to occur in the chamber. Several species not directly involved in exploiting Earth began chittering among themselves, clearly reassessing their understanding of the situation. The Confederation was founded on principles of cooperation between diverse species, Reynolds continued, his voice softening slightly. We still believe in those principles. But cooperation requires mutual respect, not one species constantly submitting to everyone else's demands. A small, insectoid delegate from a species Reynolds didn't immediately recognize raised a delicate appendage. The hive mind of TZK finds the human argument compelling. If the Confederation truly stands for equality, then the treatment of humans represents a systemic failure of our founding principles. Other delegates began to nod or gesture their species equivalent of agreement. The tide was turning. General Morks's blob body turned a dangerous shade of deep purple. This is absurd. The humans are manipulating you with their Deathworld cunning. I believe, Reynolds said calmly, that the evidence speaks for itself. VERA, please display the comparative resource allocation charts for the past 50 years. As the damning economic data appeared on screen, even the Zorn delegation fell silent. The pattern of exploitation was too obvious to deny. We propose a reset, Reynolds announced. Not revenge, not reparations, just a fresh start with fair treatment for all species, including humans. The Confederation mediator's neutral voice rang out. A motion has been made to establish a commission for the review and revision of all human-related policies and resource allocations. All in favor? One by one, delegation lights began to illuminate first the smaller species who had little stake in the exploitation, then reluctantly, the Veltraxians, whose sense of proper procedure ultimately outweighed their prejudice. Only the Zorn delegation remained opposed, their isolation now conspicuous. "In motion carries," the mediator announced. "The commission will begin work immediately." Reynolds nodded in satisfaction. It wasn't a complete victory yet, but it was a start. The humans had finally stood up for themselves, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after what galactic historians would later call the human assertion, Captain Jack Reynolds stood on the observation deck of the Earth's new diplomatic vessel, the appropriately named No Apologies. The ship was docked at Neutral Station Alpha, now significantly redesigned to accommodate all species equally. "Captain," VERA's voice held a note of satisfaction. "The final draft of the new Confederation Charter has been approved by all member species." "Even the Zorn?" Reynolds asked, surprised. "The new Zorn government has indeed ratified the Charter. Their revolution was remarkably efficient, only 3 days of internal conflict before General Morks and his administration were removed from power." Reynolds sipped his coffee, no longer a contraband substance in Confederation space, and smiled. Turns out their oppression tactics weren't just aimed at humans. Indeed, once other species began questioning Zorn manipulation strategies, internal resistance movements gained significant momentum. The observation deck doors slid open, and the rest of the original human delegation entered. They were now the senior staff of Earth's expanded diplomatic corps, wearing new uniforms that no longer downplayed human physiology. "Mining operations in the Proxima field are at full capacity," Lieutenant Okafor reported. "And the Veltraxians have been surprisingly helpful in establishing fair trade agreements." "Amazing what a little backbone can accomplish," Commander Pierce added with a grin. "The legal framework for protecting all species' biological distinctiveness is being implemented across Confederation space," Dr. Alvarez said. "No more designated scary species classifications." "And the cultural exchange program," Finn began, "is already oversubscribed," Fiona finished. "Turns out once you get past the fear, many species are actually fascinated by humans," Finn concluded. Reynolds nodded, taking in the changed galactic landscape. The past 6 months had been challenging but transformative. Once the systematic exploitation of humanity had been exposed, other marginalized species had found their voices too. The Confederation was evolving into something closer to its stated ideals. "Ambassador Reynolds," VERA announced, "the Confederation Council will convene in 30 minutes. The final ratification ceremony awaits your presence." "Still feels strange being called ambassador," Reynolds admitted. "You earned it," Okafor said simply. When they entered the council chamber, Reynolds was struck by the changes. The separate species sections were gone, replaced by mixed seating. The ridiculous contrition podium had been removed. Even the atmospheric composition had been adjusted to a compromise that worked for all attendees, rather than privileging certain species. Ambassador Clawn Tith approached, his posture notably different, no longer condescending but collegiate. "Ambassador Reynolds, a historic day for the Confederation." "Indeed," Reynolds agreed. "One that's been long overdue. We, the Veltraxian Confederacy, wishes to formally acknowledge our role in the systematic inequities of the past," Clawn Tith said, his translator conveying genuine regret. "Our obsession with procedure blinded us to the injustice we were facilitating." "The past is the past," Reynolds replied. "What matters is building a better future." The new Zorn representative, a smaller, differently colored blob than the previous administration, hovered nearby. "The reformed Zorn cooperative wishes to extend particular gratitude to humanity. Your stand against exploitation revealed corruptions within our own society that we have now addressed." "Turns out we all had something to learn," Reynolds acknowledged. As the final ratification ceremony began, Reynolds reflected on the journey. The new Confederation Charter established protections for all species' biological and cultural uniqueness. Earth had secured its rightful resources in the Proxima field. Humans were no longer forced to apologize for their Deathworld origins. Most importantly, the relationship between humanity and the galactic community had fundamentally changed. Fear and exploitation had been replaced with genuine, if sometimes awkward, attempts at mutual understanding. The ceremony concluded with the Confederation mediator's announcement: the new charter is ratified. Let this mark the beginning of true cooperation among all sentient beings. At the reception afterward, Reynolds found himself standing next to a Phobian representative remarkably, without its usual protective bubbles. Ambassador Reynolds, the Phobian's translator, conveyed, our species has begun a cultural reassessment program. We are learning to distinguish between actual threats and merely different biological expressions. That's incredibly progressive of you, Reynolds said, genuinely impressed. It is necessary. The universe is vast and diverse. Fear of difference leads to stagnation. The Phobian's tendrils shifted to a thoughtful blue hue. We have a question, if permitted. Of course. Humans have a saying. We found it in your cultural database but do not fully understand its significance in this context. Something about forgiveness? Reynolds smiled. To err is human, to forgive divine. Yes, that one. Your species stopped forgiving our transgressions, yet the outcome has been positive for all. This seems paradoxical. Reynolds considered this. I think what humans stopped doing wasn't forgiving, it was enabling. True forgiveness can only happen between equals who respect each other. What we had before wasn't forgiveness, it was submission. The Phobian's tendrils pulsed in what Reynolds now recognized as their version of understanding. This is profound. Different perspectives significantly alters meaning. As the reception continued around them, Reynolds gazed out at the representatives of dozens of species mingling with a new sense of equity and mutual respect. You know, he said to no one in particular, on Earth, sorry is just a word until you back it up with changed behavior. I think the galaxy is finally learning what real apologies look like. VERA's voice came through his earpiece. Quite poetic, Captain. Should I add philosopher to your credentials? Reynolds laughed, no longer worrying about the volume. No need, VERA. Just mark today as the day the galaxy finally understood that Deathworlders aren't monsters. We're just people who learned to survive in hard conditions, and who finally stopped saying sorry for it, VERA added. Exactly, Reynolds agreed, raising his glass in a silent toast to humanity's new standing in the stars. Exactly. Exactly,